Hey, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us this morning on this lovely day. Everybody having a good I.O.? Yeah. Good. Woo. So I'm Lawrence Moroney. I'm a developer advocate at Google, and I'm joined by Ankur Kotwal, who's also a DA. You know, we work in just promoting all of our APIs, promoting all of our technologies, and helping Google to understand what you guys need to do, and helping us to understand, helping you to understand our own technologies. Today we want to talk about Codeless Middleware, and in the context of building a full real app. We didn't want to just think in terms of demoware. We wanted to think of what if we were building a full real app, but we wanted the server-side code in this app to be optional. If we wanted to move away from thinking about building server-side code toward codeless middleware. And we wanted to make this a little bit more complex, and we're saying instead of just a simple CRUD type thing, we're going to integrate some third-party data and logic into this, just to make it feel like a little bit more realistic a scenario. So we'll start with the first part of this, and it's building a full real app. So Ankur and I got together, and we were thinking about the type of app that we'd like to build. And we're both really, really passionate about the geo APIs. We're passionate about maps. We're passionate about places. And when we started thinking about places, we were like, you know, in the world, there are some very historic places. There are very exciting places. There are really, really famous places. And there's a tree. Ankur?
You don't know this tree?
I don't know this tree.
Do you know this tree? Nobody knows this tree, Lawrence. This tree is really special to me because on December 31st, 2005, I sat under this tree and I watched the Sydney New Year's Eve fireworks. You can see the Sydney Tower there and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And the reason that that particular New Year's Eve is special to me is because I was surrounded by my family and friends, my loved ones. So it has a near and dear place in my heart. And so it's a perfect target for building an app, for building the type of app that we're going to build. So we've creatively called it Place Notes. And the idea is that we're going to be able to store notes of places that we visit.
We can even place notes about places that we visit.
Boom, boom. I told you, they would not laugh. So we can store notes at different places, and these could be about places that are well known, like the ones Lawrence showed, or ones that are really personal to us. And so then when we thought about, well, how do we build this type of app, we put together an architecture diagram. And you can see the phones on the left-hand side. We said, well, we definitely want to support Android and iOS. That's where all our users are going to be. We're going to be talking to an API endpoint that we build. That API endpoint will work with our services, and we're going to store some data in a database. And of course, because we're going to be dealing with some of these more popular places, we want to use the Google Maps Places API to do it. But as we started to build this out, we just sat there and going, this is really complicated. There's a lot of work here, right? Building an API endpoint, a service, a database, you have to choose what infrastructure you're on. You have to then build it out. You have to integrate it. You have to maintain it.
Maintenance, all that, yeah.
You want to make sure all the latest security patches on there. And of course, we're expecting this app to go like super viral,
of course.
Right?
Wouldn't you use it?
Yeah, see?
Told you they would
we
say
want
yes.
it to be scalable. And again, it just felt like we were putting pieces of a puzzle together. So that's when we thought about using Firebase. Now, Firebase is a set of tools that we announced yesterday that help you develop your app, grow an audience, and earn some money as well. And Firebase actually encompasses a number of products, but today we're only going to focus on one of them, and that's the real-time database. Because the real-time database with Firebase allows us to store and sync our data. And so the way it would work is that on our phones, we would take a note. That note would get sent off to the server, synchronized automatically. The server would then replicate that piece of data to all the other devices that need it. And this is all happening for you automatically. And it uses this really interesting event-driven programming model to be able to synchronize these things, so you can work asynchronously. And of course, this thing helps us address those things that we said were hard: the maintenance, the management, the scalability. And so when we look at our infrastructure diagram now, you might think, okay, so we're going to substitute the database with Firebase, but actually, we're able to get rid of 3 components and replace all 3 of those with Firebase. Firebase is going to do that much for us. And what we're going to change with the Places API is that we'll consume those APIs client-side. So we're literally moving to making our server-side code optional, and for our use case, we're actually getting rid of server-side code altogether. We're going to write only Android and iOS code. Lawrence, Places API.
Places API. One of my favorite APIs that there is. And one thing that I do have to point out when I was writing the code for this, when I was writing it for a database, it wouldn't actually compile because the compiler didn't recognize data. So I wrote it for a database instead. So anyway, they didn't laugh at that one either.
No.
So onto the Places API. So if you're not familiar with the Places API, I got great news for you because this thing is just awesome. The idea is that Google have data about many different places in the world, over 100 million different places, and tons and tons and tons of metadata associated with these places. So for example, restaurants, there might be links to the menus, there might be photographs, there might be my other favorite technology, Street View, inside views of these things. And these are also categorized for you in a wide range of categories. So, you have everything from A to Z, from accountants to zoos, actually stored in there. So when we come to thinking about place notes and, us wanting to place notes in locations, this turned out to be a wonderful thing. But not only that, it's when you come to determining the place that you're in, it's more than just a latitude or a longitude. There's lots of other signals that can determine a place that you're in. So for example, I really, really like coffee. And you may have seen my Coffee with a Googler show on YouTube, and I'm a big coffee fan. I drink way too much of it. But if I'm in a particular location and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, most coffee shops are going to be closed. So if I'm actually saying, hey, what are the places around me at this location, there's going to be a low likelihood coming back that I'm in a coffee shop right now. So as I scan for locations using the Places API, it determines a probability of the locations that I'm in and returns that probability to me. But that probability can be dynamic based on so many different contexts. So it's a really, really useful API to help you understand your place in this world. There's another session, it was this morning, but it'll be on YouTube, called Understand Your Place in This World. Thoroughly recommend to go take a look at it. It's great coverage of the Places API. So we said, okay, how is the Places API going to work in code? So this is some Android code that I'm going to show now, just to show how simple it is. So the first line of code here is I'm using a Google API client. If you've ever done any development for Google Play services, this guy will be familiar to you right away. If not, don't worry about it. He's your friend. He helps you interface between your application and a variety of different Google services. And in this case, I'm going to use the Place Detection API, call a method on that called getCurrentPlace, pass the Google API client to it, and then I'm going to get a callback. And in the callback, I get an onResult, which contains a place likelihood buffer, which is a list of the places that I might be in right now based on the likelihood of those places. So like I said, if I'm at 3 o'clock in the morning standing outside a coffee shop, it's going to give me less likely that I'm actually inside that coffee shop. But if I'm there at 9 o'clock in the morning during the coffee rush, it's going to be more likely that I'm inside that coffee shop. So the idea is it's going to return this list to us of places around us ordered in likelihood based on all of this intelligence. And then, once I have that list of likely places, I can say, hey, I can draw my UI, and in my UI I can start listing, okay, these are the kind of places where the app thinks you're at right now. Do you want to make a note about one of these? And this is just going to be a simple loop, right? I'm going to go through my likely places, I'm going to create a place likelihood object out of that, and then I can start calling methods on that. But the two properties that I want to show here are the name and the ID. Because if you remember, we want to store notes ourselves using our application into our Firebase. So this isn't stuff that's available in the Places API. So I'm going to get the place ID out of the Places API. I'm going to get the friendly name of that place. So instead of a long string just describing the ID, I'm going to get the friendly name like Shoreline Amphitheater out of that. And then this place type object that you see in the second last line of code, that's just a plain old Java object that I made myself that's going to define a place. It'll have an ID associated with the place, it'll have the name of the place, and it'll have whatever note that the user has created. In V1 of the application, we just did a straight text note, but that could easily be expanded for pictures or for other things.
Now, places actually, we're only using the ID and the name here, but it's really important to know that the Places API is returning a ton of data about us any given place. You can get things not, like Lawrence mentioned, opening hours, but you can get ratings, you can get photos, you can get addresses. And so there is a really rich database, but to simplify our example today, we're only using the name and the place ID. And the important thing about that place ID is that it's unique and it's stable. So all you have to do is when you fetch a place, you only need to locally cache the ID. So next time you want to get that place back, you can just get it from that ID and you know it will be there.
And so that's why we designed this entity to keep it as simple as possible that we're storing in Firebase. We're just going to store the place ID and a note. As simple as that. the simplest possible entity we could have. So for example, shoreline amphitheater, where we're at now, if we were to create a note for that, all we'd be storing is the ID for shoreline amphitheater, and then whatever note the user had actually typed in. Very, very simple entity. But let's see what that looks like in Firebase. So here's what this is on the Firebase console, where I've stored this note. And you can see when I was preparing for this last week, I was near 2 different restaurants. And so you can see there's 2 columns in this database, or let's talk about this in database terms. There's 2 rows in this database. The first row is for the first restaurant, the second row is for the second restaurant. And then also, if we think about it in columns, this first column, the one on the left, is the ID that came out of the places ID. The column on the right is just a simple note that I'd made associated with that restaurant. And I tried asking for a discount, they wouldn't give it to me, so I'm not putting their name here.
The ID here is also, in database terms, also our primary key.
Correct.
So you can look it up by that ID, that first field.
So now when it comes to storing that simple entity for a well-known place that came out of the Places API in the database, you can see how simple the code is for that. This is it. Now think about if you were building middleware, if you were building CRUD, you'd have to be building a SQL query, you'd have to be sanitizing the parameters on that SQL query, you'd have to be pushing it, you'd have to be checking for results, all of these kind of things. But in Firebase, it's as simple as, we do a Firebase database.get instance to get a reference to our Firebase database, and then on that I'm placing a child. That first parameter there, the place ID, is that long string with the place ID from the Places API, and then I'm setting a value on that to be the note. So for our simple entity like that, this is how easy it is for me to actually store data in the database. Who thinks that's pretty cool?
I want to emphasize this a bit more. That infrastructure diagram we talked about, those 3 boxes, we have 2 lines of code that give you the right operation. That's it, and does, replaces those 3 boxes. So those challenges that we talked about like building these components out and integrating them, we have 2 lines of Java code that replace this. And today we're showing Java code, so we're building an Android app. But on iOS, it's quite equivalent as well when you work with the API.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward as well. So now we say, okay, so those are places that come out of like the Places API, well-known places like the Pyramids or the Las Vegas Strip or the Statue of Liberty. But what about Anchor's tree? Okay, Anchor's tree isn't in the Places API, at least not yet.
No.
And so we say, well, what if somebody has a very personal location like that, like Anchor's tree, that they want to be able to store in a database like this one? So we need a slightly more advanced entity for that. We'll have a place ID. It's not going to be the same as the ID coming from the Places API, because this entity doesn't exist there. We'll have a note, and then we'll say, okay, we'll just put a latitude and a longitude on that so that we can store it. But then we have a problem when it comes to retrieving it. When it comes to, we say, okay, when we're running our application, when the person opens it, they want to see a list of places near them. And that would also include maybe, Anchor made his notes like on New Year's Eve, and then sounds like we're taking off. And maybe maybe he will go back a year later or something like that, and he wants to be able to retrieve that note, which means somehow the app is going to have to query all these notes in Firebase for a latitude and a longitude, and say within a mile or 1.6 kilometers. Am I right?
That's correct.
I'm getting better with my metric. And so if we say within a mile or 1.6 kilometers of your current location, and get the notes for that, and like render the IDs or the names of those places. So how would we do that? And this is part of the other magic of Firebase. And Firebase, as you know, was a product before, the new stuff that we came out with yesterday. And one of the things, before I do that, no spoilers, I'll say this is what the entity will look like. So here it's a case of when I was testing this last week, I was testing it in my home office. And here I put I called my home office, I gave it the ID custom : my office. I put a note on that says, this is where I work. And then there's if you can see right at the bottom of the slide, there's 2 numbers, like the 0 prefix and 1 prefix. Can anybody guess what those numbers are? Lats and longs. I kind of spoiled it in the previous slide, didn't I? But never mind. So those are latitudes and longitudes. So now, if you can imagine a database like this with thousands of entries, and some of those latitudes and longitudes are within a mile or 1.6 kilometers or whatever distance I want from where I am now, how am I going to query that efficiently to be able to find the ones that are within that range from me? And part of the magic of Firebase is its extensibility, and there's a tool of libraries called GeoFire. Has anybody heard of GeoFire or used it? Okay,
few people.
most of you have. You're in for a treat. If you ever want to build any geo-based applications using GeoFire, this makes it amazingly easy for you. All you got to do is give it a latitude and a longitude, and it will match any records in the database that have been stored with GeoFire and give them back to you. It's as simple as that. And here's the code for it. So if you remember the single line of code that we had earlier on, where we're saying, for a well-known place, not one of our custom places, we set the place ID, we add a note to that, and we're done. So now if it's GeoFire, for one of our custom places, all we have to do is, on GeoFire itself, call the setLocation method. We pass that a place ID, and then we pass that a geolocation object that we've initialized with our latitude and our longitude. That's going to give us an override, that's going to give us an on-complete callback, and if we override that, then all we have to do in that is do pretty much the same code. There's going to be a place ID on that. It already had children, you remember, with the 0 and 1 for latitude and longitude, so that's why the code is slightly different here. I create a child called note and set a value on that. And this is my entire code for storing data in a database for my application, both custom locations that I've created and stuff that came out of the Places API. It's pretty cool, right? I'm worried it's going to put me out of a job. So, putting this all together then, and putting our application together, and Anchor, can you explain how the whole thing works and how the swim lanes and all that work?
Let's take a look at a broader look at all of this. So here's our app again. When we want to, what we're going to do is actually show two activities to the user. The first activity is going to be a list of places around them, as well as any custom notes that they've written on their current location. And those custom notes, we'll use a 1.6 kilometer radius, or 1 mile as they say here. And the way we're going to get those first set of lists of the places around us is using the Places API. So what we're going to do from our app is say to the Places API, get current place. We saw that code earlier. It's going to give us a list of that place likelihood buffer of all the likely places. But we also want to get that second batch of notes that the user may have already created, those custom notes. So we're going to just query the Firebase database directly using GeoFire. We're going to say, give me notes around my current position, and it's going to return any custom places. So with that, then what we'll do is when the user selects a note from that list, from that index, we're going to go to the details view. So we'll look up that ID into the real-time database, fetch it back, and we have our note. It's really, really simple, right? Just a list view to start with our index, and then a details view. And these are the flows. That's how simple it is. So Lawrence, why don't we look through a demo?
Sure. Let's see. I believe it's this one. Okay, perfect. Everybody see it? So this is real code on a real demo on the Wi-Fi for the conference, so forgive me if things fail, but I'll do my best. So I sat in this room just before the session began, and I ran the application, and it gave me this list of places. So the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, down to Virgo stage, actually came out of the Places API. I'm really surprised that Virgo stage was added to the Places API. So that's pretty cool. Somebody must have added it last night. So those now, I've made that call to the Places API. It's taken a look at the location of my phone. It's using things like, as well as my latitude and longitude, it's using beacons. That's where it got Virgo stage, right? Because we've got a beacon in here. And it's using beacons. It's using anything that's around me to determine my actual location. And it gave me this list. And then at the bottom of the list, there's a custom tag. So if I touch that one now, it just throws up a dialog saying, do you want to name this place? So I'm going to touch that. I'm going to say, what's this place called? I'll say it's the lectern that I'm at. This is the part with the oh, look, my typing's terrible, sorry. Lectern. Okay, so now I'm creating a note for where I'm at the lectern. Okay, and I'll say these red, I don't know if you guys can see the red dots, but there's red dots all over my hands, and it makes it look like a sniper's aiming at me. Are scary. They didn't laugh at that one either, Anchor.
No, I think we cut the jokes, Lawrence.
Yeah. So now, like, I go and I refresh it, and we see the lectern has been added there. So now I've actually created a note for the lectern. I've saved it. It's been saved in Firebase, and I'm good to go. Really easy, right? So let me go back and save that. And now if I were to say, earlier on when I was sitting in the room, right outside, there's that code the road bus. So I created an entity called GeoBus, and I go in to see it, go visit the GeoBus. It's awesome. and I strongly recommend that you guys do that. So those are for custom ones, but what if I wanted to do it for, Shoreline Amphitheater? Okay, so now that's the first entity that I was talking about. All that I have to do is get a place ID from the Places API. So you see the long string there beginning with CH. And that's the entity came back from the Places API. I type in hello room, or I type in something else and I save it. And I now have that note in Firebase for this location for Shoreline Amphitheater. So say we come back here next year for Google I/O, I'd be able to run the app and start seeing the notes that I made this year. And all kinds of good stuff like that, all kinds of fun stuff like that. So that's a quick look at the app, and just wanted to show you guys that it's a real thing. All right, Anchor.
So, today we've covered how you can take what could be a complex piece of infrastructure for building a mobile app to something that's actually quite trivial, something that we wrote entirely in client code. And we've showed how the Firebase real-time database has substituted so many of those components.
Yep.
So you can learn more about Firebase at firebase.google.com. And there are many, many more products in Firebase. I highly recommend you check out the rest of them as well.
And I think the more products in Firebase is an important part, because once you've started, like you've linked in the Firebase libraries to build this kind of thing, now look at all the extra goodies that you'll be able to do as well. So Firebase Auth, for example, will allow you to provide sign-in to this application. So if you wanted to sign in and provide a customized sign-in experience, which I haven't done here, or app indexing. Has anybody heard of app indexing? So app indexing is this really, really cool technology whereby your app can be put into the Google index. So if people are searching for content that's available in your app, they can be led to install your app and use your app. So there's a whole ton of extra technologies. Oh, forgot analytics, right? Everybody, I love analytics, and analytics are a great way for you to determine who's using your app, what's working, what's not working. And then the other one that I used primarily when I was building this one, unfortunately, was a crash reporting, because I had a lot of crashes as I was building it, and the built-in crash reporting in Firebase really helped me to analyze that and find that. So, Firebase goes just beyond the storage of the data as we've done here, but if you do this codeless middleware, if you make the data storage and data retrieval as easily as it's been done in here, then all those extra goodies are available to you.
We also use the Places API today, and the reason that that's important is because people don't think of their location by their latitude and longitude. We also don't think of most locations by address. Like, we may have typed in the address at some point to get to I/O today, to Shoreline Amphitheater, but when you're thinking about where you're at I/O or you're at Shoreline Amphitheater. You're not thinking of it by address. And Places API helps us to identify locations by their place names. So, I have a question for you, Lawrence.
Uh-oh.
What are you doing for New Year's Eve this year?
Maybe I'll be sitting under a tree in Sydney.
Yeah, would you like to come check out my tree?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was my question to you. I'd like to open it up now for any questions that you may have. Please just queue up behind the microphone and we'd be happy to answer them.